Chapter 1751. Why did the flame wane? The work progressed slowly. There was no day or night in the sky below, and Sonny did not particularly care for tracking time anymore. He only knew how much of it had passed because of the happy shadow, which continued to act as Rain's guardian somewhere far away. The task of learning how to read the forbidden runes was engrossing. Sonny was not trying to decipher the ancient script blindly. He was familiar with many variations of the runic language that had been used in the dream realm, or rather, in the multitude of realms that would one day become its various regions. The languages the people of the bygone eras had spoken were different, and so were the writing systems they had used. However, they all shared a common root, Hope, who had invented the concept of writing and the original runic script. Being familiar with that script and many of its descendants, Sonny could somewhat infer the meaning of derivative runic languages and learn how to read them. That task was not an easy one, even for a saint, but after spending a few weeks in the Ebony Tower, doing nothing but studying Nether's writings, he was making quick progress. Sonny studied the runes, took walks along the edge of the scorched island, slept, and lay idly on his cot, staring at the ceiling. His life was tranquil, easy, and entertaining, truly free of all burdens. Sometimes he felt the desire to claw at the walls of the obsidian tower. In those moments, he visited the lightless shrine and stared at the statue of the goddess of black skis. The face of the statue was obscured by a veil, but the sculpture was so exquisitely carved that the veil seemed to be made from fine silk, not cold stone. He could see a vague silhouette of a divinely beautiful face, outlined by its delicate folds and creases. Sonny couldn't help but feel that it shared a close resemblance to the faces of the broken porcelain dolls that piled into a mountain on the lowest level of the tower, as well as Saint's inhumanly beautiful visage. Had Nether been obsessed with Storm God, or simply too lazy to sculpt a multitude of faces when there already was a perfectly fine one for him to copy? He had been a very practical man, after all, as well as the most impractical of them. Why else would he rise in rebellion against the gods? As Sonny made advancements in his understanding of the forbidden runes, he was able to make a rough estimate of when exactly the demon of destiny had resided in the Ebony Tower. It had been in the latter half of the Golden Age, during Hope's imprisonment. Nether seemed to have already fallen out with Storm God, but was not contemplating going to war against the heavens yet. Instead, he had turned his back on the world and dedicated himself to his misguided passion, trying to create living beings, which was an authority exclusive to the gods. Much like Sonny had turned his back on the world and dedicated himself to studying these forbidden runes. The Ebony Tower seemed to attract disheartened men. Most of the runes carved into its walls were esoteric, to say the least. Sonny slowly learned how to understand their meaning, but that did not mean that he understood what they meant. It would be the same if someone had given him a highly advanced scientific paper on quantum physics to read. Knowing human language would not help him comprehend the contents. The fact that Nether's writing had never been meant to be read by anyone except the demon of destiny himself did not help either. He had left these notes for himself, so they weren't very detailed. There were many passages like dissected, structure pathways flow, basic mechanics hide the deep complexity of process and function, material, or correlation or causation, potential hints at obsolescence, source unknown, observation flawed. Sonny could not really understand the meaning of these passages, but he did discern several underlying themes. Nether's goal was to create a living being, and as such, his research had been developing in two directions: the creation of a body and the creation of a soul. The former was purely time-consuming, but the latter seemed to vex the demon to no end. How did the gods will souls into existence? Why were the creatures created by the gods able to propagate, giving birth to new souls? What was the secret? there was no answer. The demon of fate had created weaving, while the demon of desire had created runic sorcery. The demon of destiny, however, had not authored an original school of sorcery of his own, taking elements from wherever he felt useful and bending them to serve his purpose. However, he had possessed the deepest understanding of soul power out of everyone Sunny had known, except for the gods themselves. Nether had been able to manipulate souls and soul essence to a frightening degree, accomplishing things that should not have been possible. And yet, he had not been able to create a living being out of nothing, no matter how ingenious his methods were and how great his determination was. That was one thing that the demon of destiny could not build. For a time, Sunny knew that the demon had eventually succeeded, creating Saint and her people. His perception was influenced by knowing the end result, but back then, Nether must have been daring to the point of insanity to pursue something that had never been done before and was not supposed to be possible. What had motivated him to persist in his seemingly hopeless endeavor? Sunny did not know, and doubted that he would learn the answer in the Ebony Tower. The runes carved into its walls were Nether's research notes, not a personal diary. There was no mention of the demon's feelings or emotions, as if he had not been capable of having them at all. That said, not everything written on the black walls was dry and void of feeling. After weeks of studying the runes, Sunny concentrated on 3 fragments, all unlike the rest of the passages he had translated. The first one seemed like a poem, or a short story that Nether had written down for some unknown reason. It read, "Why does the flame wane? I asked the black skis, what is life?" The skis answered in a subtle voice, "A mother is watching her children die slowly of starvation. There is only enough food for one of them, but she is hungry too. That is life. The war is over, and those who discarded their weapons to surrender are made slaves. They are brought to an arena and told to kill each other. A young warrior looks at a sword, his hand trembling. That is life. A man loves his wife but feels lonely in her company. One day, walking the market, he sees a beautiful stranger smiling at him sweetly. He hesitates to return the smile. That is life as well." I pondered. So life is a choice. The skis laughed. Life is desire. It is a desire to be alive. The skis were illuminated by a myriad of stars, burning in the beautiful darkness. Like the flame of desire had burned in the hideous void, giving birth to the 7 gods. Why does the flame wane? Sunny thought about the strange story for a long time. Was it a fable Nether had written down on a whim, or the transcript of an actual conversation between him and Storm God? In any case, it had to have meaning. The demon of destiny was not someone who would have carved runes into stone without a reason. He had been trying to create life, so the story could have been a contemplation on the nature of life. However, to Sunny, it seemed like there were many layers to this passage. The goddess of black skis had described 3 situations. One was about hunger, one was about the desire to survive, and the last one was about lust. So, had she been trying to say that life was hunger, fear, and lust? He did not think so. It seemed that the exact situation did not matter too much. What mattered was that the character of each anecdote was faced with a choice. Nether had been the demon of choice, so was that the true meaning of the story? Somehow, Sunny felt that it was not that important either. The truly important part was the first and the last lines of the story. Why did the flame wane? The waning flame was, presumably, desire, the primordial desire that had been born in the void and gave birth to the gods in turn. Sunny remembered the murals describing the origin of the demons clearly, both those that he had seen in the drowned library of fallen grace and those he had seen in the estuary. On one, a golden flame was burning in the darkness. On the next, 7 figures, the gods, were surrounding the greatly diminished flame. Sitting on the edge of the ebony island and looking at the sea of divine flames above, he blinked. No, wait, but really, why did the flame diminish? The divine flames that had created the sky below waned slowly over thousands of years, until only this much was left. One day, they would be extinguished altogether. But why had the primordial desire waned after giving birth to the gods? Did it have something to do with the secret of life? Nether had built the ebony tower because he wanted to use divine flame to create living beings, but he eventually abandoned that path and returned to the underworld. Had he been trying to substitute the flame of desire with the flame of divinity? All of it seemed too interconnected somehow, and encapsulated in the strange story to be a mere coincidence. However, even if it was, Sonny could not, for the life of him, understand what it actually meant. He summoned Saint, shared his theory with her, and asked for her opinion. Saint, of course, remained silent, simply staring at him with indifference. Thought so. Sonny clicked his tongue, dismissed the shadow, and returned to the tower with a sullen expression on his pale face. The second passage he was keenly interested in was much less poetic, but tantalized Sonny much more. That was because it mentioned the other demons, most of all, the nebulous demon of fate. The runes read, "Gods created all living creatures, but not all creatures they created carry a divine lineage. Only those born of the gods do, and those born of their descendants. Why have the gods forbidden us 7 to sire offspring? Why are we destined for loneliness? Is it because we are of the forgotten one, who slumbers in the void? Where is the void and where is its gate? How did Weaver enter it and what did Weaver see? Why did Weaver decide to break the will of the gods and create a lineage? Blood, bone, flesh, soul, spirit, mind, and shadow. The gods shall discover the transgression, but they cannot. That is because, having created a lineage, Weaver does not possess a lineage. It has been lost and will be lost, therefore having never been in Weaver's possession. One cannot be punished for something that has never been. A piece is lost to fantasy, a piece is lost to fear. A piece is lost to respite, a piece is lost to darkness. A piece is lost to sorrow, a piece is lost to rot. And finally, a piece is stolen by a thief. Weaver's defiance is elusive, just like Weaver is. But mine will be different. Sonny stared at the runes for a while, his eyes burning with wanderlust. Nether seemed to have been considering the difference between him, the youngest sibling, and Weaver, the oldest. Both had decided to defy the gods, but in a different way. Gods created all living creatures, but only those born of them carry a divine lineage. It seemed that Weaver had pursued the latter, while Nether had pursued the former. But more importantly, Weaver's lineage. Finally, he knew the remaining parts of the weave. He had already found blood weave, bone weave, and soul weave. Flesh, mind, spirit, and shadow weaves remained. Shadow weave. Would absorbing it make up for Shadow God's lineage that blood weave had so unceremoniously devoured? And if he managed to collect all 7, would the broken lineage of Weaver restore itself to an unblemished state, granting him its full power? Sonny finally understood why the weave had been shattered into many fragments. To begin with, it was because Weaver had hidden its existence from the gods by scattering it across the tapestry of fate. Its fragments had always been fated to be lost, and so it was as if Weaver had never possessed them at all. The fragment destined to be lost to sorrow was soul weave, which Sonny had found near Oblivion's grave. The fragment destined to be lost to rot was bone weave, which he had found here in the ebony tower. The fragment destined to be stolen by a thief was blood weave, which the nightmare spell had granted him for slaying the spawn of the vile thieving bird. At the time when Nether had been carving these runes, Oblivion was still alive, while Weaver had not lost an arm. Therefore, the demon of fate had foreseen these events in advance, or maybe even reached into the tapestry of fate to attach the fragments of the weave to its strings. One had to be inventive to avoid the gaze of the gods. But where had the other 4 fragments ended up? Sunny looked back at the runes. A piece is lost to fantasy, a piece is lost to fear, a piece is lost to respite, a piece is lost to darkness. He contemplated for a few minutes, then turned and gazed at the map where the strongholds of the demons were depicted. Fantasy, fear, rest, darkness. Imagination, dread, repose, destiny. Were the remaining 4 fragments of the weave located somewhere in Bastion, Ravenheart, Stormsea, and the underworld? He was suddenly overcome by the desire to travel to Bastion and check himself. However, that desire quickly dimmed. Going back to Bastion, Ravenheart, and the great citadel of the House of Night that drifted on the waves of Stormsea meant diving back into the boiling cauldron of humanity. Sunny had just escaped it. Why would he go back? The underworld was a better choice, but also a suicidal one. Sunny was not ready to venture into the depths of the Hollow Mountains. His strength might have increased explosively after the transcendence, but true darkness was the natural enemy of shadows. Out there, below the jagged peaks, was the realm of darkness. Sunny would be nearly powerless there, blind, weakened, and without an ally. He could imagine himself braving a death zone, but not the underworld. Forget it then. Deeply disappointed, Sunny turned away from the passage and tried to never look at it again. Maybe someday in the future. The third passage that interested him, coincidentally, had to do with the Hollow Mountains. But it was a strange one. The runes read, "What can contain the void? Nothing can." Gods used nothing to envelop the void and place the cage of desire above it. In the places where the cage is thin, nothing slips through its seams. The underworld is one such place, shrouded in nothing. It is like mist. However, nobody can exist in the mist. Nothing can contain the void, and nobody exists within it. I am wary of nobody and fear nothing. Sunny was utterly bewildered by what he read and thought that he had messed up the translation at first. But after going over it one more time, he confirmed that the translation was correct. Was Nether having a stroke? He reread the runes several more times, his bewilderment growing. No, he was not someone who would write down nonsense. So the passage must have had meaning, but what was the meaning of nothing? Sunny pondered the question for a few days, until a tenuous idea surfaced in his mind. What if nothing was literally something? Not the absence of everything, but the presence of nothing. Just thinking about that made his head hurt. But it seemed very much like something that the gods would be involved in. These beings operated with ideas and concepts, after all, having shaped the very universe into existence. So if nothing could contain the void, the gods could have gone and literally used nothing to contain it, enveloping the void in a layer of nothingness, which the void beings could not cross because nothing could stop them, and bringing down the cage of existence on top of that layer. That would be a godlike thing to do, wouldn't it? That nothingness seemed to seep into the universe, though. Like mist. Weren't the Hollow Mountains always shrouded in a strange mist? Sunny opened his eyes wide, remembering how the cohort had escaped a flood of mist on the outskirts of the Hollow Mountains. Back then, they felt a terrible threat emanating from it, not knowing why. If that mist was literally nothingness, would they have been erased from existence if it swallowed them? Sunny also remembered the eerie creature that had come from the mist, and demanded that he open his eyes on the ashen barrow. Nobody exists within it. Were there actual beings born from indwelling in nothingness? He suddenly felt a chill running down his spine. The demon of destiny was wary of nothing and feared nobody. Wasn't Nether actually admitting that he felt wary of nothingness, and feared the beings dwelling in the mist. Goddammit! As if the world wasn't scary enough already. Sonny already had his hands full dealing with the nightmare creatures. There were also the void creatures, which were infinitely more harrowing than the familiar abominations. Luckily, they were locked away by the gods. And now there were also nothing creatures, nobodies. No, he simply refused to deal with that. Time to get some sleep. Sonny shook his head and left the 5th level of the Ebony Tower, returning to his living quarters. The translation was mostly complete. He had already determined which passages he could understand, which he couldn't fathom, and which spoke too much about the void, meaning that he had to avoid them at all costs. Staying in the sky below was slowly becoming meaningless. Perhaps it was time to start thinking about his next destination. I'll consider it tomorrow. Just before falling asleep, Sonny wondered where he would go, and a sudden thought crossed his mind. I don't exist in the memories of the world anymore, so am I a nothing creature too? A nobody. In the morning, Sonny woke up and simply remained on the cot, staring at the ceiling. He felt strangely apathetic. Yesterday, he had considered whether it was worth it to continue studying Nether's writings. There wasn't much left for him to learn from the runes. As soon as that idea entered his mind, all the motivation and excitement he had been feeling about translating them disappeared. Without something to look forward to, he could not find a reason to get up. How long had he spent in the sky below anyway? A month, closer to 2. In any case, he had beaten his previous record. Might as well get comfortable. Sonny closed his eyes and went back to sleep. He spent the next few days doing nothing. Sometimes, Sonny would go outside and look at the sea of flames. Sometimes, he would remain in the Ebony Tower, staring at the walls. Only his incarnation that guarded Rain remained active, which was the sole reason he was not dying of boredom. Eventually, however, he became fixated on a strange thought. Can I cross the Hollow Mountains? The question seemed rhetorical, but it was not. Sonny did not dare delve into the hollow interior of the great mountain chain, where elemental darkness dwelled. But what about braving the mist shrouding it to traverse the exterior? If the mist enveloping the jagged peaks was indeed pure nothingness, then anyone who entered it would become nothing. At least that was what one would think. They would think wrongly, though. Sonny had undeniable proof that it was possible to survive in the mist, at least for some time. It was the fact that Saint Cormac had spent months exploring the Hollow Mountains on behalf of Clan Valor before being killed by Saint Tyrus. What had been his goal? Searching for a way to cross to the other side, looking for an entrance into the underworld where Nether's stronghold was supposedly located, or something else entirely which Sonny could not even guess. In any case, if Cormac could do it, then Sonny could too. Should I try? He had no plans and no particular desires, except for the desire to be far away from everyone. Was there a more distant place than the unexplored vastness beyond the Hollow Mountains? There, Sonny would be truly and utterly alone, which was what he wanted. The romance of the unknown. His curiosity and wanderlust were calling him. On the other side of the impregnable mountain chain lay the forgotten shore. It was now a desolate land of perpetual darkness. Most of the creatures that had populated the coral labyrinth were gone, annihilated by the terror of the Crimson Spire. The dark sea was gone as well, sealed by his own hand. Maybe a few abominations still survived, somewhere in the darkness, but he still wanted to visit that place one more time. Sonny could retrace the steps of the journey he had made with Nephi's and Cassie. He could make sure that the Soul Devourer was dead, and if not, fulfill his promise to burn the damned thing to the ground. He could return to the dark city and sift through the scorched ruin of the bright castle, find the statue of the Slayer that he had never seen, and sleep on his own bed in the ruined cathedral. And that was not all. Humans knew about the Forgotten Shore now. They also knew that the Nightmare Desert lay to the east, thanks to Nephi's making the journey. However, no one had even learned what lay to the west and north of that cursed place. Sonny could become the first human to ever set foot in those mysterious regions of the dream realm. Sure, no one would ever learn about his discoveries, but he would know. Doing it for himself was enough. A subtle sense of excitement slowly took hold of his heart. No, no, I must have lost my mind. The Hollow Mountains were vast, and they were called a death zone for a reason. Who would want to enter a death zone of their own free will? One would have to be completely insane to do something like that. He would never. Shaking his head, Sonny summoned the covetous coffer and went about cooking himself a dinner. The dimensional storage was still full of monster meat, but there were plenty of ingredients from the waking world as well. Feeling a bit down, Sonny decided to pamper himself a little. Pulling out a printed cooking book from the alloy chest, he turned the pages absent-mindedly. Eventually, his attention was drawn to two recipes. Sonny frowned. Huh. Waffles or pancakes? He wasn't very knowledgeable about these staple dishes, so deciding which to make was a big problem. In the end, he decided to make both. Sonny had abandoned the thought of crossing the Hollow Mountains. Or rather, he had tried to. However, it was stuck in his mind like a catchy melody. The more time he spent idling in the Ebony Tower, the stronger the call of adventure became. He had come up with all kinds of reasons for why it was a terrible idea, and yet it only grew more alluring. Can I do it or not? He probably could. Sonny continued to hesitate, wasting time and indecision. In the end, the decision was more or less made for him. One day, he opened his eyes earlier than usual. His 5 shadows had all been resting on the floor, but now they seemed alert. His shadow sense had long ago enveloped the island, so he could instantly feel the most minute changes in his surroundings. Someone was moving on the highest floor of the Ebony Tower. The portal. Sonny rose from the cot noiselessly. He had been careful not to leave any traces of himself anywhere on the island, so all there was to do was place his pillow back in its original position. The shadows wrapped themselves around his body, and a moment later he dissolved into the darkness. Soon enough, a delicate figure walked down the stairs, followed by a few more. It was Cassie and a few fire keepers, who seemed to have undergone the ascension already. Gather everything, we will be leaving shortly. Sonny observed as the fire keepers went about dismantling their makeshift outpost. The cots were disassembled. The enchanted lanterns were gathered and prepared to be carried away. The modest kitchen was taken apart and stored in crates for transportation. What are they doing? Cassie looked a little bit disheveled, which was very unlike her usual tidy self. She observed the fire keepers silently, but at some point, a slight scowl appeared on her face. The blind seer wandered the hall for a bit, seemingly without aim. Eventually, she stopped near the cot Sonny had slept on and touched the pillow briefly. He was about to grow tense, but at that point, one of the fire keepers called out to her. Cassie, are we really not going to be able to return here? Turning around, she lingered for a few moments, then answered with a sigh. I don't know. The ivory tower is about to leave the chained isles. The connection between the two portals might depend on distance, or it might not. In any case, it is better not to take the risk. Hiding in the shadows, Sonny was momentarily stunned. Right, Nephi's told Cassie to take the ivory tower to Bastion. He had forgotten all about it. What would have happened if he stayed on the Ebony Island until the connection between the two portals was broken? Was he capable of ascending all the way to the sky above on his own? Probably, after doing some weaving at least. But it would be such a pain. It seems I can't stay here anymore. It was so sudden. But it was also a relief. Feeling strangely liberated, Sonny silently hid himself in Cassie's shadow and stayed with her until the outpost was completely disassembled. Then, he followed the blind seer back to the portal. On the way, Sunny said a silent goodbye to the statue of Storm God and threw one last glance at the map carved into the wall on the 5th level. The Hollow Mountains were calling to him, and he had no reason to refuse the invitation anymore. Once Cassie and the Firekeepers returned to the Ivory Island, taking him with them, Sunny silently reached down with his senses and used Shadow Step to teleport to the distant land far below. He stepped out of the shadows on the southern island, in the ruins of the ancient stronghold that had once belonged to Shadow Lord, and where he battled Nightmare many years ago. In the sky above, the beautiful silhouette of the Ivory Island was drifting among clouds. Sunny remained motionless for a while, looking up. Eventually, the flying island slowly moved, traveling south, crossing the chasm separating the Chained Isles from the rest of the Dream Realm and leaving them behind. It was time for him to go as well. He watched the ivory tower float away and then turned around, facing north. Goodbye. Taking the first step, Sunny headed away from the ruined stronghold, never looking back. Sunny remembered the first time he went all the way to the northern boundary of the Chained Isles vividly. Back then, it had taken Cassie and him around a month to reach the Night Temple from the sanctuary of Noctis. The southern island was further away from the Hollow Mountains than the sanctuary, and yet Sunny made the journey in under a week. Even then, it had only taken him that long because he was taking his sweet time. He did not need to traverse the heavenly chains to get from one island to the other anymore. Instead, he simply turned into a crow and flew north, landing from time to rest or take a look at something peculiar. The crushing was of no issue because he could escape it at any time with Shadow Step. The nightmare creatures of the Chained Isles were too weak to pose a serious threat to him, at least as long as he stayed alert. Most simply fled, frightened by his dark presence. Strangely enough, Sunny felt that he was more at home in the dream realm than he was in the waking world. It was as though being a transcendent finally made him suited to exist in this land of beauty and dread. Soon, he saw a black line on the northern horizon. The line grew darker and taller as he ventured further north, until he finally could make out the jagged peaks of the Hollow Mountains. The great mountain chain pierced the sky like the fangs of a giant dragon. At least that was how Sunny always perceived it before. Now, however, he knew that they were simply a scar left on the surface of the world by the fall of a void creature that had been killed here at the dawn of time. True darkness was born from the blood of that abyssal being, which had seeped into the broken earth. Having beheld the draconian peaks, Sunny lowered his gaze and looked down. The northern island had been destroyed in the battle between Sky Tide and St. Cormac, so the chasm separating the Chained Isles from the Hollow Mountains was wider than before. Across the dark abyss of the sky below, the mountains rose steeply into the distant sky, white mist rolling down their slopes. It flowed into the abyss like a wall of clouds, disappearing into the darkness. Sunny exhaled slowly. He was standing on the edge of an island, with the broken chain that had once connected it to the northern island rattling quietly far below. Far away, on the other side of the chasm, the great anchor chain that had once connected the Chained Isles to the Hollow Mountains was hidden by mist. He was not alone. Saint, Serpent, Nightmare, and Fiend were standing around him. Gloomy, creepy, haughty, naughty, and crazy shadows lay on the ground as well. Only the happy shadow was missing, busy with its own mission. Sunny exhaled slowly, then looked at his retinue. He remained silent for a while, then said with a pale smile, "The smart way of doing this would be to send one of you into the mist first, to see how it goes." None of them showed any reaction except for Fiend, who tried to hide behind Saint without drawing attention. Sadly, with his current size, hiding behind Saint was not as effective as it had been before. Sunny grinned. "Luckily for you, No one has ever accused me of being smart. He had been complimented on his wit from time to time, but never in an accusatory tone. So, the statement was technically true. Shaking his head, Sonny commanded the shadows to wrap themselves around his body. Then, he dismissed the shadows and faced the abyssal chasm once more. What a bother! He had already tried to extend his shadow sense into the mist to breach the chasm with Shadow Step, but couldn't sense a single shadow on the other side. In fact, he couldn't sense anything. It was as if nothing existed beyond the veil of mist. Perhaps quite literally. Here we go. Sonny dissolved into the shadows, then emerged from them in the form of a crow. Flapping his wings, he cawed loudly and flew toward the hollow mountains. He left the rattling of chains behind and glided on the winds above the bottomless abyss of the sky below. The white wall of flowing mist drew closer and closer, and as it did, Sonny's heart beat faster and faster. What if I really just disappear? Would it be that bad? After all, he was all but erased from existence already. Ending up being swallowed by nothing only seemed fitting. What the hell, of course it's bad. Sonny was not going to disappear. He still wanted to live, in fact, he wanted to live more than ever before. That was a strange quirk of his personality. The less reason there was for him to live, the more he wanted to survive, out of nothing but pure spite. Now that the world had truly and utterly rejected him, Sonny had to stay alive, no matter the cost. Letting out another caw, Sonny plunged into the white mist. Immediately, he felt strange. Ugh. What was that feeling? Sonny couldn't quite describe it. However, it was debilitating enough to make him fall from the sky. He crashed into the cold rock, rolling down the slope in a mess of limbs. The crow shell had collapsed, and he was back to his human body. The rocks bit into his skin painfully, but Sonny did not and could not pay it any attention. What the hell is this? It was. It was like a mind attack, but also completely different. At the same time, it was like a soul attack, but did not bring him any pain. It was also like a physical attack, but did not harm his body. The best way Sonny could describe it was that, suddenly, he felt as if he was dreaming, or rather had been dreaming all along. As if he was nothing but a fleeting dream, and all his life had been one long, meaningless nightmare. And therefore, that none of it was real, and none of him was real either. His sense of self was slowly dissolving under the numb indifference of that obvious realization, as if he was being pulled into a state of senselessness. Sonny had never existed and would never exist. He did not exist. As soon as he acknowledged that fact, his soul started to dim. His body started to lose strength as well. His thoughts turned slower. That is right. Sonny smiled faintly. Come from nothing, return to nothing. He could sense the mist flowing around him. Through him. Was his body turning transparent? If so, that was all right. That was how it should be. Only, if I don't exist, if there is no me, then why does it hurt to have never existed so much? He had experienced being erased from existence once already. That pain would have been meaningless if he had never existed in the first place. So, the mere fact that it had hurt him so badly was a contradiction. If he was nobody, then he would have felt nothing. But he felt something, and therefore he had to be somebody. Pain bloomed in his heart like a flower. And with it, his transcendent soul ignited with the beautiful radiance of divine flame. Tenacious blood ran through his body, filling it with strength. His mind was aflame with desire. Desire to exist. I heard, therefore I am. Wait, what? What kind of nonsense am I spouting? Sonny groaned, and concentrated all of his formidable mind on a single thought. I am. He was not nothing. He was not nobody. He was sunless, formerly known, or rather unknown, as lost from light. He was the devil of Antarctica. He had been the mad prince once, but he was not any more. He was even Lord Mongrel, even if he wished otherwise. He was Sunny. It took all his focus to keep that thought from dissolving into the mist. Once he managed to prove his own existence, the pressure of nothingness did not disappear, and the pull of non-existence did not lessen. Sunny had to keep concentrating on the fact that he had been, was, and would be without reprieve. If he let go of that fervent thought even for a few moments, both his soul and body would probably turn into flowing mist. Damnation! Grimacing, he slowly rose from the cold stone and stared into the white nothingness that surrounded him with a grim expression. Ah, how insidious! This was not going to be easy. Mumbling quiet curses, Sunny dusted himself off and looked around. He could not see anything, and the mist was dampening his senses. So, he didn't even know which direction he was supposed to go. However, it wasn't hard to determine where the north was. All he had to do was pay attention to the ground. The ground under his feet was sloping in a certain direction. Going down meant returning to the chained isles. Going up meant venturing deeper into the hollow mountains. He rubbed his face, sighed, and started climbing the slope. Sunny walked up the rocky slope. Surrounded by the flowing mist and a silence so absolute that it was almost deafening. He could not see very well, and even if he could, he wouldn't have been able to perceive much. His mind was so strained by the imperative need to continuously affirm his own existence that there wasn't much space left for other thoughts. The mist could barely be permeated by his shadow sense, as well. His senses were impaired, not as much as they would have been in true darkness, but still severely. Step, step, another step. All sounds were muffled, and he could not hear his own footsteps. Because of that, Sunny had an eerie feeling that he was not moving at all. Damnation! This is going to be tiring. He walked for a few hours, feeling more and more fatigued. Just a day before, he was flying across the chained isles, unrestrained and full of power, but now, simply taking a step felt like a burden. That said, Sunny suspected that he would slowly, very slowly, grow accustomed to the pressure of existing within nothingness. He would have been long erased from existence if he had been a mere sleeper, but a transcendent soul was much more vast and potent than that of a dormant being. More importantly, it was fundamentally different from the souls of sleepers, awakened and masters. That was because a saint's soul was connected to the world. So, to erase it, nothingness had to erase all those connections as well. That was why Sunny could struggle to keep existing in the mist. In the next few days, he made little progress. Sunny did not dare to move brazenly here in the hollow mountains, especially before knowing what horrors lay hidden in the fog. So he kept a low profile and simply walked, like a mundane human would. The slopes under his feet turned steeper and steeper, and his surroundings became colder and colder. If these were mundane mountains, there would have already been snow covering the ground. But in this eerie place, the hidden expanse of black rock remained barren, with nothing but mist flowing across its surface. Sunny judged that he would have to start climbing in earnest soon, scaling towering cliffs. Alternatively, he would have to circle around the steepest slopes to find easier paths. There were no ruins hidden in the mist, no signs of living beings having ever been here. No sounds, no signs of danger. Nevertheless, Sunny tried to remain as alert as possible. He did not believe for a moment that there would be no abominations hiding in the fog. After all, if he could resist the pull of nothingness, so would the more powerful of the nightmare creatures. And then there were the others, those who had been born from the mist. As the days passed, he was slowly getting better at keeping himself from disappearing. It was still putting a constant strain on his mind, but at least Sunny did not sway like a drunk anymore while walking. He could pay more attention to his surroundings as well, which was a relief. He journeyed deeper into the mountains, having nothing to do but think. Of course, what he thought about the most was nothing. Sonny did not know how Cormac had managed to brave the insidious mist, perhaps the same way he was doing it, through sheer will, or perhaps with the help of some artifact forged by the King of Swords. However, he had come to believe that some people were better suited for the task than others. And surprisingly, Sonny was one such person. There were several reasons why he could survive better in the white mist of the Hollow Mountains. The first reason was very simple. It was his transcendent ability, shadow incarnation. One had to constantly affirm their existence if they wanted to resist the pull of nothingness, which, among other things, meant that they could not allow themselves to sleep. Surrendering to sleep, even for a few moments, would mean death, and even saints had to rest from time to time. Sonny, however, could delegate rest to his absent incarnation. Not only that, but his avatar could also don the puppeteer's shroud. He had transplanted the blessing of spirit, enchantment of the shroud of graceless dusk, into the weave of that armor, which enhanced his ability to endure and recover from mental fatigue. Cormac had not possessed such an ability, so his expeditions into the Hollow Mountains had never lasted more than a month or two. Sonny, however, could, in theory, stay here indefinitely thanks to his avatar. The second reason was that he possessed a rich experience of trying to maintain his sense of self due to shadow dance. Sonny had spent years trying not to lose himself in the forms and shapes of the beings he shadowed, so resisting the dreadful pull of nothingness was, in a sense, nothing new to him. It would have been much better if he still had a true name, but sadly, that was one of the two disadvantages weighing him down. The other disadvantage was that there were no strings of fate connecting him to other people, places, and events. Erasing someone like him, untethered from everything, was easier. After all, the vacuum left in his absence would be very small. Luckily, there was the third reason, his greatest ally in the sea of nothingness. It had to do with the power and nature of his soul. A powerful soul was harder to erase from existence than a weak one, and Sonny's soul was much more potent than that of almost any other saint, let alone someone of a lesser rank. Not only did he possess 6 cores instead of 1, but each of them was also altered and bolstered by soul weave. He also carried 4 powerful creatures in his soul: saint, serpent, nightmare, and fiend. The nature of his soul was no less important. In that regard, Sonny actually had 2 advantages. The first was one of his attribute, the flame of divinity. For whatever reason, divinity seemed to repel nothingness, protecting him like a radiant shield. The second was the fact that he was a shadow and had the soul of a shadow. Sonny did not know why, but he had come to believe that shadows were especially difficult to erase from existence. The vile thieving bird's spawn had failed to consume his soul because he possessed shadow essence instead of soul essence. Similarly, nothingness was having trouble swallowing him now. He remembered the cohort's journey to the outer boundary of the underworld and the forlorn shadows he had found in the maze. They had belonged to the companions of the First Lord, but their owners were somehow gone, leaving only the orphaned shadows behind. Sonny thought that he understood how that had happened better now. They must have encountered a creature of nothingness somewhere there, in the dark maze. But Sonny and the rest had been warned by Cassie to keep their eyes shut, and so they somehow passed through the darkness unscathed. Stopping for a moment, Sonny let out a sigh, leaned against the black rocks, and stared into the mist. Keep our eyes shut. Once again, Sonny remembered the chilling encounter with the creature that had come to the ashen barrow from the mist. Just like in the dark maze on the precipice of the underworld, he had survived that encounter by keeping his eyes shut on Cassie's advice. The creature had been insidious, though, trying to trick them into opening their eyes. That was the first of the very few times Sonny had encountered an abomination capable of human speech. But now, looking back on that fearful night, Sonny couldn't help but doubt if it had really spoken. He went over each and every word the creature had said. His expression slowly froze. Now that he thought about it, was it not the case? Every word it used was one that Nephi's, Cassie, or Sonny had spoken themselves. The mist being had stolen their words, just like it had stolen Cassie's voice, like a twisted reflection. Was that because the creatures of nothingness did not possess voices of their own, or for some other, unfathomable reason? In any case, how the hell did the carapace demon chase it away, back into the depths of the dark sea? The nightmare creatures populating the transient sea of the forgotten shore were all of the corrupted rank, at least. Soul Devourer's loyal thrall, however, was merely an awakened demon. Had it been because it served the tree and was augmented by it in some way? Because the Soul Devourer attacked the invader alongside its guardian? Or simply because battling the mist creatures was different from battling other abominations? Maybe the carapace demon had kept its eyes shut as well. Don't I know another creature who makes me want to keep my eyes closed, though? Well, actually, he knew too. The first one was Torment, but he was more interested in the second one, Mordred, the self-proclaimed Prince of Nothing, who could enter a being's soul through the eyes. That title of his, was it simply an ironic moniker Mordred had invented because of being abandoned by his family, or something far more meaningful? After all, the connection between him and nothingness did not stop there. In the second nightmare, the original body he had been sent into belonged to a mysterious mist creature, a mist creature who had descended from the Hollow Mountains and consumed every living soul in the northern reaches of the Kingdom of Hope. Mordred had undergone some sort of transformation in the Ebony Tower, as well, making him almost impossible to sense through divination. The Ebony Tower, which had belonged to Nether, the Prince of the Underworld, who was closely tied to the white mist and nothingness, wearing it like a mantle. Was it all a series of coincidences, or did Mordred possess some connection to nothing? I just can't make sense of that guy. What was his aspect? What was his flaw? What had Asterion done to him, and why did he enter the first nightmare as a child? What had happened to him in that nightmare? Mordred carried the lineage of War God, the goddess of life, as well as progress, technology, craft, and intellect, the patron deity of humanity. The core of his aspect seemed to be connected to reflections and mirrors, which didn't strike Sonny like something having to do with warfare, and was only tangentially connected to technology and crafting. Of course, lineage and aspect did not have to be directly connected. Sonny himself carried the lineage of Weaver, but possessed an aspect tied to Shadow God. Nephi's carried the lineage of Sun God, but her aspect was not connected to any god at all, but rather to the mythical Nephilim. In any case, what did mirrors have to do with nothingness? Sonny did not see a connection, but there had to be one. I'll ask the bastard the next time I see him. No, right, I won't see him ever again. It was a bit of a relief. After catching his breath, metaphorically speaking, Sonny sighed and continued on his way. However, this time, he took additional precautions. He closed his eyes and moved forward, relying on nothing but his dampened shadow sense, sticking to shadows where he could. The nothingness was oppressive, but at the same time, it was strangely healing. Sonny was tormented by fatelessness. He was in pain because nobody remembered him, but here, ironically, his very life depended on being able to at least remember himself, and do it fiercely. If no one else could acknowledge his existence, he had to do it himself. And the more Sonny affirmed his existence, the duller his pain became. What a perverse situation. Moving stealthily through the mist, Sonny smiled crookedly. But then he froze. Crap. He had grown so accustomed to the desolate silence of the Hollow Mountains that the sudden change sent him into a panic. The ground had just trembled under his feet. Alarmed, he dashed to the nearest outcropping of rocks and dissolved into the shadows cast by the overhanging stones. Remaining absolutely still, Sunny observed the world somberly. The ground was shaking at short intervals, the tremors growing more violent with each minute. The silence was finally broken by the sound of rocks rolling noisily down the slopes. It echoed in the mist, distorted strangely. What? It was then that it happened. A twisted dark pillar descended from the sky and crashed into the mountain slope not far away from him. It remained motionless for a few moments, leaned, and then rose into the mist, only to fall down once more, dozens of meters away. Further away, another pillar crashed into the stone, and then another and another and another. Sunny suddenly felt very small. These are legs. In the next moment, an indescribable sound rolled through the mist, disturbing its flow. Distorted, it was like a deafening bellow of a war horn or a sorrowful wail of a gargantuan beast. The wail was full of fear and agony. A vast shadow covered the area where Sunny was hiding, and then dark liquid poured from above. Enormous waterfalls of something that resembled blood fell down and splattered on the rocks, turning into mountain rivers. Hidden in the shadows, Sunny observed the terrible scene in silence. The mist flowed above the rivers of dark blood, and as he watched, the blood slowly became transparent, already turning into wisps of fog. A few moments later, the foaming rivers were gone, and all that was left was nothing. The towering pillars left the range of his perception, and the vast shadow pressing Sunny down disappeared with them. The enormous creature, whatever it was, had moved on. About a minute later, something crashed into the ground in the distance, causing one last, violent tremor. Sunny hesitated for a while, then emerged from the shadows. He stood motionless for a while, looking in the direction of where the enormous creature had gone. Eventually, he gritted his teeth and followed. What the hell am I doing? He wasn't sure why he wanted to find the place where the creature had fallen, but something was pushing him forward. Perhaps it was the need to know what kind of enemies he would face in this eerie place. Perhaps it was simple curiosity. Perhaps it was something akin to the call of the void, the morbid desire to jump into the beckoning abyss. At some point, Sunny turned to a vertical slope and started climbing. The white mist was not uniform. It was thicker in some places and thinner in others. Usually, the closer to a peak one got, the further they would be able to see. It took him some time to climb the tall cliff stealthily. Following along its edge, Sunny reached a narrow ledge and came into view of a vast mountain valley. It was shrouded in mist, but he could still see the appalling shape of an immense, abhorrent creature that lay in the fog, its titanic body stretching as far as he could see. Shifting his gaze, Sunny paled when he saw an ocean of vile darkness permeating the being's soul, spreading from 7 tumorous growths. A great titan. His heart was suddenly cold. Looking upon a great titan was already unnerving enough. What made Sunny truly tense, however, was the fact that the abomination's flesh was terribly torn and mutilated, as if it had barely escaped from a fearsome clash. What could have mangled a great titan so badly? The wounds were hideous and utterly dreadful, and yet they did not seem grievous enough to kill a being such as this. However, they weakened it. They weakened its body, they weakened its mind, they weakened its soul, and they weakened its will. And that was much too dangerous in the Hollow Mountains. Although the unfathomable abomination was still alive, the mist was already flowing over its endless shape. Hiding in the shadows, stunned, Sunny remained motionless and watched. As a great titan was devoured by nothingness, slowly dissolving into a milky fog. Not long after it was completely gone, it died just like that. No, not even died. The titan was simply erased, as if it had never existed at all. Sunny had felt bold not too long ago. Transcendence had increased his power tremendously, and reuniting with Serpent added another fearsome shadow to his dark legion. He had braved the dark depths of Earth's oceans, slaughtered his way across the Antarctic center like a grim reaper, slain the winter beast, and crossed the chained isles as if he was taking a walk in the park. His power had gotten to his head, and he had thought himself truly strong. The hollow mountains disabused him of that notion. Wandering the endless expanse of flowing mist, lost among jagged peaks, Sonny was reminded of how weak and insignificant he was in the grand scheme of things. Effie had once said that the dream realm was a dark paradise, but as far as Sonny was concerned, it seemed more like hell. If the conquered regions of the dream realm were hell, however, the hollow mountains were a deeper and much more dreadful abyss. The horrors that dwelled here were beyond all reason, unfathomable and indescribable, possessing the power to reshape the world with the chilling malice of their alien wills. Great abominations, and even cursed ones. Sonny saw their grotesque shapes moving in the mist from time to time, making him shudder. Sometimes, a vague silhouette of a vast creature would pass his hiding spot, wreathed in wisps of fog. Sometimes, an entire section of a mountain would come alive, sliding away to reveal itself as a gargantuan tentacle that had been wrapped around the towering peak. Sometimes, he would hear eerie sounds echoing in the mist and feel as though his very mind was being consumed by them. If not for the onyx mantle, which granted him a high degree of resistance to soul and mind attacks, those eerie cries alone would have been enough to kill him. This was a land of death, after all. Humans had named such regions death zones for a reason. There was no place for mortals here. And yet Sonny was here. He might have been humbled by the dread of the hollow mountains, but he was not deterred by it. Even if he was not powerful enough to face the creatures dwelling in the mist, he was strong and resourceful enough to survive them. As time went on, he learned to resist the will-eroding pull of nothingness better. It still strained him, but pushing against the dissolution of his self had eventually become a habit. He moved stealthily and stayed out of sight, making sure not to attract the attention of the great nightmare creatures, and retreated at the mere suspicion of a cursed one being close by. Of course, he was not always able to escape. As months went by, Sonny failed to evade the attention of powerful abominations a few times. Navigating the mist was difficult, and his senses were impaired, so were theirs, but that simply meant that many things were up to luck. And Sonny had no luck to speak of. When he was forced to fight, the battles were chilling. The black rock shattered, and the mist boiled from the furious forces unleashed by the combatants. Sonny had to give it his all to simply survive, testing the absolute limits of his transcendent power and using every ounce of cunning dwelling in his devious mind. Sometimes he killed the enemy. Sometimes he repelled their assault and escaped. Sometimes he hurt them enough for their will to be shaken, and let the mist finish the job. It was strangely convenient. Unlike the nightmare creatures, Sonny never surrendered to nothingness, no matter how badly he was hurt, how terribly his flesh was mangled, and how much agony he was in. His will and desire to exist never wavered. That was an advantage humans had over the abominable beings of corruption, it seemed. The abominations had never had a strong sense of self, to begin with, while humans prized themselves for being highly individualistic. Sonny had never thought that there would come a time when his only enemies would be great nightmare creatures, but here it was. The hollow mountains were a natural preserve for the most dreadful of beings. Only those whose will was strong enough to exist in nothingness could survive here, after all. Sonny was one such being, as well it seemed. He had wandered the steep slopes of black rock for months, persistently searching for safer paths and seeking shelter in shallow caves when his body needed rest. Being surrounded by terrible enemies who were much more powerful than him, and hiding from them like a tiny bug in order to survive. It felt a little bit nostalgic. Sonny felt as small and powerless as he had on the forgotten shore, but at the same time his mind was as clear as it had been there. He just had to survive, using all possible means. There was just life and death, with nothing in between. And just like on the Forgotten Shore, the more he survived, the stronger he became. Battling great nightmare creature in the flowing mist was just as merciless of a crucible as the Crimson Labyrinth and the Dark City had been for him as a sleeper. He was slowly coming into his own strength, learning how to wield the vast power of a transcendent. He also gained terrible experience of facing such creatures. With every dreadful abomination that fell by his hand, Sonny learned how to kill the next one better. And with every abomination he managed to elude, he learned how to escape from the next one better. Fighting opponents stronger than himself. That was the best way to grow. Of course, it was not all battles here in the Hollow Mountains. In fact, Sonny spent most of his time hiding and creeping stealthily between the jagged peaks. He was tense and on edge most of the time, but sometimes he was also very bored. There were long stretches of time he had to spend holed up in some cave or hidden in the dark embrace of shadows, waiting for the danger to pass. Sonny entertained himself by working on the project he had started in the tomb of Ariel, trying to turn the covetous coffer into an echo. He was making steady progress, slowly learning how to make that particular memory into a vessel for the shadow of the mordant mimic. Now that Sonny had lost the assistance of the nightmare spell, he wasn't sure if he would even be able to make the conversion, but he still wanted to try, since he knew that he would not be getting any new echoes for the same reason. Fighting powerful nightmare creatures was more than exciting, but he needed some variety as far as entertainment was concerned. Weaving provided a nice change of pace. Of course, nightmare creatures were not the only beings dwelling in the mist. There were also the others. Sonny had only encountered the creatures of nothingness after leaving the outskirts of the Hollow Mountains and venturing deeper into the vast expanse of the deadly region. His very first encounter had almost become his last. Whispers of long-forgotten voices, echoes of long-extinguished wails, they surrounded him from all sides, drifting in the mist. Sonny had his eyes tightly shut, hiding in the shadows and praying for the eerie being to move past without noticing him. Somehow, he knew that if he saw it, he would not survive. Or at least his self would not survive. Who knew? Perhaps 6 lonely shadows would be left wandering the world in his wake. Eventually, the whispers grew distant and disappeared. The deeper into the mist Sonny went, the more of these creatures he encountered. He had never gazed at them, so he didn't even know what they looked like, or if they looked like anything at all. He could allow himself to fight the nightmare creatures, but every time he encountered a mist being, he either hid or escaped. It was only that, after a while, Sonny started to doubt if they were even creatures at all. It almost felt as if the voices wandering the fog were strange phenomena instead, as though the eerie remnants of things and beings erased by nothingness drifted in the mist, attracted to each other by the ancient vestiges of erased wills. He had a particular suspicion, though. To be is to be perceived. There was a school of thought that claimed that things only existed if they were perceived. That which was not perceived did not exist, but since one could not perceive nothing, everything they did perceive had to be something. In other words, nothing would become something by the mere act of being perceived. Like a reflection, perhaps, which was only there when one stood in front of the mirror. It was a bit of a strange philosophy, and one that depended on the existence of an omniscient God to make sense, a God who perceived all of existence, and therefore made it real. The gods were dead, of course, and more than that, they had never been omniscient. So that disproved the whole notion, but Sonny still felt that there was a kernel of truth to it. Perhaps things could exist without being perceived, and nothing would not become something even if it was witnessed. But he felt that the beings of the mist would definitely become more real if they were witnessed. To behold them was the same as giving them power. Looking upon them would make nothing become something enough to come into contact with existence and tear it apart. At least that was what he thought. For that reason, Sonny did not only close his eyes near the mist creatures, but also covered his ears and retracted his shadow sense, turning himself blind, deaf, and mute. Being devoid of most senses in the middle of a death zone was its own kind of terror, but he simply gritted his teeth and endured. Sonny did not know if what he was doing had any meaning, but the creatures of nothingness had never managed to consume him, so maybe he was doing something right. Even if Sonny found a tentative way to survive encounters with the creatures of the mist, and even if he was slowly learning how to survive in the battles against the great nightmare creatures, claiming their lives one after another, even if he avoided the cursed ones with utmost caution, there was still one big problem he had to contend with: the hollow mountains themselves. The Forgotten Shore was a vast land, one that probably had been its own realm once upon a time. The Nightmare Desert was of the same size, if not larger, and yet the mountain chain stretched from east to west like a great wall, bordering both of these regions and a few others. It was simply enormous. Worse than that, the jagged peaks were shrouded in thick mist, which made navigating them all but impossible. Sonny was mostly sure that he had not lost his understanding of where the north was, but after dozens of furious battles and narrow escapes, his certainty was not absolute. Maybe he was hopelessly lost, or maybe the hollow mountains were simply too vast. In any case, his journey was taking longer than he had expected. Much, much longer. Out there beyond the mist, Rain's family had already left the waking world behind and settled in Ravenheart. Sonny's avatar had approached her and somehow talked his way into becoming her teacher. But Sonny was still wandering the mist, hiding from the unspeakable horrors that dwelled within it, and clashing with them when there was no chance to escape. At times, he doubted that anything except for the white mist had ever existed. He was so accustomed to the flowing fog and the black rocks, so used to the harsh life of the weakest being in the mountains, and so familiar with the strange nature of existing in the sea of nothingness that his past did not seem real. Wasn't it ironic? The only thing that seemed to have existed was non-existence. The warm and endearing life of his distant avatar seemed like a dream instead. Funny. Beaten and battered, hurting all over, Sonny was slowly learning how to fight and function without the nightmare spell. Tired of only working on turning the covetous coffer into an echo, he tried to envision a memory that would replace some of the rudimentary functions of the spell, especially those having to do with presenting information in an easily digestible manner. Such a memory was not that hard to weave, but actually designing it required some creativity. After all, the source of all that information would not be the nightmare spell, but Sonny himself. Therefore, he had to find a way to automatically convert things he knew or perceived into runes. That was an interesting challenge. Apart from that, he was also trying to teach himself how to enter his soul sea. Some of the things he had learned with the help of the nightmare spell had remained with him, like muscle memory, the acts of traveling between realms and placing realm tethers, for example. But some, like visiting the soul sea, were completely gone, so he had to relearn them. The ancient people of the dream realm had been able to enter their soul seas long before the nightmare spell was created, so there was no reason that he couldn't do the same. In fact, there had probably never been a transcendent who did not know the way into their soul sea, so Sonny felt a bit ashamed of himself. It was just hard to find the way without a teacher. Nevertheless, he eventually succeeded, even if it had taken him slightly more than a year. After entering the soul sea, Sonny confirmed two things. The first thing was that the memories he could not summon were truly gone, instead of being simply unavailable. That gave him a sense of bitter melancholy. The second thing he learned was that the formless shadow of the vile thieving bird's spawn was gone, as well, just as he had suspected. The loathsome creature had claimed its odious chick. A year had already passed, and he was still in the Hollow Mountains. He had celebrated his 22nd birthday in a tiny cave on the side of a misty mountain. Sunny felt thankful to the onyx mantle and the puppeteer's shroud. If not for the fact that both of his armors could repair themselves, he would have been wearing rags. He was also thankful to the endless spring. Because of Cassie's gift, he was not only able to quench his thirst whenever he wanted, but also wash himself regularly. Otherwise, every creature in the region would have probably detected his stench. He was also thankful to Bone Weave and his transcendent teeth. Most of the provisions he had stored in the covetous coffer were long gone, so his diet consisted predominantly of the meat harvested from the great nightmare creatures slain by him. It tasted heavenly, but chewing it often was something only saints would be able to do. A few months after gaining access to the Soul Sea, Sunny successfully turned the covetous coffer into a flawed echo. It was only an echo in name, possessing the structure of one, but lacking the main component, the semblance of autonomy. Nevertheless, that was fine. Sunny did not need the coffer to do anything that a real echo would be able to do. He just needed it to be the vessel for the shadow. Once the faux echo was turned into a shadow, the autonomy would follow. It was just that it would be true autonomy, not the masterful imitation of one granted by the spell. It took him another month to figure out how to fuse the shadow of the mordant mimic with the covetous coffer. Strangely enough, Serpent was of great help in that regard. With its help, Sunny guided the dark flames of his soul to encompass both, and listened to his instincts from there. Sadly, everything happened so fast that he failed to glean the secrets of the mysterious process. He still had no idea how exactly shadows were made, just that his aspect contained some sort of authority that allowed him to create them. Nevertheless, Sunny wasn't sure that he would be able to repeat the process just yet. In any case, that was how the marvelous mimic was born. Sunny had come up with the name himself, because that was how he felt after commanding his new shadow to turn itself into a little hut. Sleeping under an actual roof, away from the mist, wasn't that simply marvelous? His journey through the hollow mountains was still exhausting and harrowing, but at least it had become a little more comfortable. In the end, it took him around a year and a half to escape that misty hell. One day, Sunny was limping down a slope, one of the hundreds, or maybe even thousands of the slopes he had climbed, with an emotionless expression on his pale face. Of course, no one could see his face because it was covered by Weaver's mask. Hidden from view, his eyes were bleak and lifeless. His hair had grown longer than it had ever been and was tied roughly by a piece of string. The puppeteer's shroud was torn, tattered, and stained with blood. He had just escaped from a terrible fight and had no time to dismiss the armor yet, giving it a chance to repair itself. 4 of his shadows were exploring the mist, surrounding him from all sides, far enough to serve as scouts, but close enough to escape back to him at the first hint of danger. Only Gloomy remained glued to his feet. Sunny dismissed Weaver's mask and said in a flat voice, "Well, anyway, that might be true, but mind your manners. I am a saint, you know, Saint Sunless. Would it kill you to flatter me once in a while?" The shadow stared at him sarcastically, then suddenly rose from the ground, turning into an avatar. The avatar, unlike the original body, was clad in the onyx mantle. The avatar said, "So what? I am Saint Sunless too. I never lie." Sunny stared at the avatar darkly. "What a hateful face. Stop staring at me, bastard." The avatar scowled. "Who are you calling a bastard, you bastard? Don't you have any respect for our mother?" Sunny hissed through gritted teeth. "Be a bit louder, why won't you? Do you want some cursed creature to hear you?" The avatar stared at him gloomily for a while, then looked away. They walked side by side for some time, keeping quiet. Eventually, Sunny spat angrily. "Waste of essence." The avatar grinned. "I might be a waste of essence, but you're the one wasting essence to have a conversation with yourself. Fool." Sunny widened his eyes. What conversation? It's a quarrel with myself. Get your facts straight, idiot. The avatar did not answer immediately, instead turning his head this way and that. Eventually he asked, Say, don't you think that the mist has been strangely thin recently? I can almost see the next mountain. Sunny scoffed. That's just how it is. But then he fell silent, because at that moment, Sunny fully realized that he was right. The mist was indeed too thin. It was thinner than ever before even. He lingered for a moment, then dismissed the avatar, wrapped the shadow around his body and hurried his steps. He recalled the scouting shadows too, augmenting his body further. Can it be? No, really, can it? The world was slowly turning darker. It can. Sunny forced himself to remain calm and alert, moving forward as fast as he could while remaining cautious. Half a day later, he climbed a tall peak and looked ahead, staggering slightly at the sight. He did not even register at first what he was looking at. The only thing he cared about was that he could see anything at all. Out there in front of him, there was no mist. Instead, there was a vast and desolate expanse of flat land, a land shrouded in eternal darkness, with a starless void looming above it as a black sky. Sunny inhaled deeply. No way. After all these years, he had returned to the forgotten shore. The desolate expanse of the forgotten shore lay in front of Sunny, shrouded in darkness. The black sky was vast and empty. There were no stars, no moon, and no sun populating the lightless abyss, making it seem boundless. Faced with the hollow eternity of its unfathomable grandeur, Sunny couldn't help but feel indescribably small. Below the black sky, a barren wasteland stretched as far as the eye could see. The forgotten shore had changed, becoming almost unrecognizable. The terror of the spire, nameless sun, was dead, and the endless sea of crimson coral that had been born from her was gone as well, replaced by ashen dust. The darkness shrouding the desolate expanse was absolute, but it was merely the absence of light, not the true darkness that dwelled in the abyss of the underworld. Therefore, Sunny's gaze could pierce its veil without restraint. The forgotten shore had become a land of shadows. His bloodless lips twisted into a pale smile. I'm back. It took him a few more days to descend from the hollow mountains and leave the dark slopes behind, finally setting foot on the forgotten shore again. Surrounded by the sea of ashen dust and absolute silence, Sunny remained motionless for a while, gazing into the distance with a strange expression on his bruised face. The lack of light, the lack of sound, the lack of life. How peaceful. It was a land of death. He walked a few steps forward and then staggered, falling to his knees. His hands drowned in the dust, and his breathing had become labored, hoarse whistles escaping from his mouth each time his chest rose and fell. Argiela. Sunny was suffocating. It was not for the lack of air, but simply because both his mind and body were in turmoil. He was having a strange semblance of a panic attack, caused by the fact that there was no mist around him anymore. There was no nothingness, and therefore, Sunny didn't have to struggle to remain existing anymore. He had grown so accustomed to that constant necessity, though, that its lack was like a powerful shock. Everything around him was so solid and immutable, so tactile and palpable, so something. Everything was something. Wasn't that bizarre? As it turned out, it was possible to experience a panic attack from the sense of relief. That feeling was so powerful that it debilitated Sunny completely, making him unable to think, move, or control himself. He remained on his knees for a few moments, and then sprawled in the dust. It's so calm. Very soon, he curled into a ball and peacefully fell asleep. Sunny slept without dreams for several days. He was both surprised and concerned by how long his original body remained asleep, but judged that it deserved a little rest. Or maybe a lot of it. Spending a year and a half in the Hollow Mountains was not for the faint of heart. In fact, it was pure madness. If Sonny had known how long and dreadful his journey would be, he would have never ventured into the mist. Or maybe not. Maybe he would have still gone into the nothingness. After all, even though crossing the Hollow Mountains had been a nightmarish affair, it had also been fun in a perverse and morbid kind of way. It was also quite fruitful, tempering his will and sharpening his skills. Sonny was a transcendent now, and so his skills needed to become transcendent as well. In fact, he had been contemplating the concept of a transcendent battle art as of late. In any case, his body needed to rest, so he let it sleep. However, sleeping in the dust was not too comfortable. He manifested an avatar and summoned the marvelous mimic. Once the shadow turned itself into a hut, the avatar carried his body inside and put it on the makeshift bed, which was nothing more than an elevated platform formed by the mimic on his behalf. Saint, serpent, fiend, and nightmare guarded the hut, each augmented by one of the shadows. The avatar, meanwhile, made a fire and went about preparing some food. By the time Sonny woke up, there was a real feast waiting for him on the table. He remained motionless for a while, then sighed and sat up, rubbing his eyes. The pillow and blanket he had manifested before slowly dissolved into shadows. The avatar gestured to the food with a grin. "Come eat. I have 10 different types of monster meat for you to enjoy." Sonny was quite hungry, so he didn't waste any time. Taking the first bite, he lingered for a few moments, and then asked somberly, "Have we run out of salt?" The avatar shrugged. "You know we did." Sonny let out another sigh. "What about coffee?" The avatar looked at him with amusement. "There's a bit left. Let's save it for a special occasion." Sonny did not need to ask himself these questions, of course, because he already knew all the answers. But still, it was nicer to eat while enjoying a friendly conversation, even if he was talking to himself. His retinue was great in many regards, but none of them were the talkative sort, in fact. The only one of who had ever spoken was Fiend, but that guy was better off keeping his mouth shut. Finishing his breakfast, Sonny mounted Nightmare, dismissed the rest of the shadows as well as the avatar, and headed north. The darkness took them in its welcoming embrace, and the ashen dust rose into the air, disturbed by the adamantine hooves of the tenebrous stallion. It was strange. Sonny vividly remembered the long journey back to the dark city that he and the members of the cohort had made after visiting the Hollow Mountains. Back then, it had been an endless battle for survival. The Crimson Labyrinth had been teeming with all kinds of vile nightmare creatures, and all those creatures had wanted to taste their blood. But now the nightmare creatures were gone, annihilated by the merciless sun. The Crimson Labyrinth was gone, too, its demise caused by the destruction of the sun. The coral maze had withered in the absence of its source and crumbled into dust. Now there was no one to lunge at Sonny from the darkness. There was nothing but death and desolation around him. Silence and peace. He rode the nightmare north at a mild pace, not in a hurry to reach his destination. Rocking gently in the saddle, Sonny sipped water from the endless spring and looked around, his gaze full of placid curiosity. "I think I recognize that place, no do I?" It was hard to orient himself in the sea of dust. There were a few landmarks that Sonny would have recognized, but he entered the forgotten shore in a different spot from where the cohort had gone. His route was entirely different, and he could have been hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away from the places that the cohort had visited. Well, it did not matter. If Sonny wanted to, he could spend the rest of his life here. He would find what he was searching for eventually. No, actually, that was not quite right. Since there were very few nightmare creatures on the forgotten shore now, if any, his supplies would run out eventually. So his time was limited after all. Sonny's laughter rang in the tranquil silence. "Gods, never thought I'd have such a problem." There were not enough abominations around. Such a travesty. Wasn't that ironic? Sonny traveled on horseback for a few days, then turned into a crow and flew into the boundless black sky. Drifting on the winds, he soared above the sea of ash and dust and made his way north while observing the desolate land for any familiar landmarks. No monster lunged at him from the dust or from the black abyss above. This land, which had become synonymous with dread and danger in his mind, was now strangely peaceful. It seemed safer than even the waking world, let alone other regions of the dream realm. Sonny opened his beak and let out a few piercing caws, laughing at the irony. It would be funny if it wasn't so sad. After flying above the barren wasteland for a few more days, he found what he was looking for. The ruins of the Crimson Spire. The Crimson Spire, which had been a symbol of both oppression and salvation for the sleepers of the Forgotten Shore, was no more. Sonny had witnessed the beginning of its destruction, all those years ago, but was sent away by Nephi's before the Cyclopean structure collapsed. Looking at the mountain of shattered black stone that towered above the sea of dust like a titanic gravestone, he wondered how she had escaped the cataclysmic collapse. It must have been hard to escape that disaster. It must have been even harder still to survive the long journey across the desolate Forgotten Shore, traverse the nightmare desert, enter the underworld, and conquer the second nightmare. He had always known how hard it would have been for a mere sleeper, but only after spending close to 2 years in solitude did Sonny realize how taxing it must have been on Neff's mind. Escaping the collapsing spire had probably been the easiest of her ordeals. Sonny gazed upon the vast ruin from the sky, then plummeted down and turned into a human. Walking across the dust, he fell into a solemn mood. Soon, something crunched under the boot of the onyx mantle. He hesitated for a moment, then kneeled and brushed the dust away. Below it, a monstrous skull was revealed. Sonny stared at it for a while, then rose and looked around. He could discern more bones on the ground around him, all covered by a thick layer of dust. A quiet sigh escaped from his lips. It's here. He was on the edges of the battlefield, where the Dreamer army had fought against the horde of nightmare creatures. There in the distance stood the broken remains of the siege engines that Kai had commanded. Not too far away, Effie had held the line against the flood of abominations, her soldiers dying one by one until nobody was left. Behind that place was the spot where the Dreamer army had made its last stand, the rising water already reaching their knees. Sonny knew exactly how many sleepers had come to siege the Crimson Spire. He also knew how many of them had survived. So it wasn't difficult to calculate how many human skulls lay here, buried in the ashen dust. He remained silent for a while, and then said quietly, "Your nightmare is over." Sighing deeply, he continued on his way to the bridge that led to the island where the spire had once stood. The bridge itself had long collapsed, destroyed by the falling debris. Once upon a time, Sonny had used the Dark Wing and Saint's strength to breach the wide divide. Today, however, he simply disappeared from the spot and appeared on the other side a moment later. All it took was a single step. Clad in an onyx armor, with his raven-black hair dancing in the wind, Sonny walked across the rubble and then froze in place, a subtle expression of astonishment appearing on his alabaster face. His eyes widened slightly. Well, this is a surprise. Out of there in front of him, a stone colossus was kneeling on the ground, unmoving. Sonny recognized him instantly. The weathered surface of the ancient stone, the small cracks and fissures where countless abominations had assaulted the giant since ancient time. After wandering the Forgotten Shore for thousands of years, the statue of the builder had finally come to a rest. Of course, his head was still missing. The giant hammer that had once struck down the harrowing depth dweller lay in the rubble to the side, forgotten and abandoned. The colossus was still and motionless, its back turned to Sonny. Inhaling deeply, He walked around the gargantuan statue and faced it. For a while there was only silence. In front of the kneeling colossus, 6 stone heads lay in the rubble, staring blindly at the empty space where the gates of the Crimson Spire had once been. The Lord, the Priestess, the Hunter, the Slayer, the Knight, the Stranger. The 7th head, the Builder's head, was held gently in the statue's hands. The colossus did not show any sign of life, having found what he had been looking for all that time. Sonny lingered for a bit, then shifted his gaze, looking within the stone giant. His mind was full of bright curiosity. "What are you, really?" After a while, a strange sound escaped from his lips. "So that's how it is." The walking statue was neither a living being nor a nightmare creature. It had no soul. Instead, 7 transcendent soul shards were hidden in its stone depths, connected by dimly glimmering essence channels. Soul shards, not cores. The ancient colossus was an automaton, a great golem created by the builder and brought to a semblance of life by sorcery. Sonny had no doubt that if he broke the statue apart, he would find a complicated weave of countless runes engraved into its hollow core and the expansive web of essence channels. It was a crude creation, far less intricate than even the echoes that the spell weaved. No wonder Saint had treated it with disdain. She was a true living being, after all, first created from stone by the demon of choice, then brought back to life by a treacherous shadow. The wandering colossus, the forsaken knight of the ruined cathedral, they were no more than pale imitations. Their power might have been much greater than hers, but their nature was deeply and fundamentally inferior. If Sonny was to guess, one of the 7 heroes of the Forgotten Shore, the Stranger, must have been one of the stone saints, and had brought a small number of his soldiers with him to this dark land. The builder must have been in awe of Nether's craftsmanship, and tried to recreate it clumsily. The walking giant was the result. By now, the 7 soul shards placed in his stone body were almost entirely devoid of essence, shimmering dimly, one step away from being extinguished. Perhaps the colossus had been absorbing power from the artificial sun, and was left without a source of essence after the Crimson Terror was destroyed. Perhaps he had simply exhausted all his power and came to a natural end. In any case, the headless statue would not be wandering the vast expanse of the Forgotten Shore ever again. Sonny threw one last glance at it and turned away with a sigh. "I'm glad you found what you were looking for." He walked away, then started climbing the rubble. "Even the big guy is gone. Why does it make me feel sad? It's like I barely recognize the place." The reason he had come to the ruins of the Crimson Spire was still there, though. It was at the very heart of the mountains of crushed stone, at the bottom of a vast well. Sonny climbed down, being extremely careful not to fall. He did not trust the stability of the rubble and tested each foothold before lowering himself deeper into the darkness, and for a good reason. At the bottom of the deep well was a vast pool of black water. Its surface was perfectly still and flat, like that of a harrowing mirror made from pure darkness. Although the water was opaque and Sonny could see how far down it went, he felt as though it was unimaginably deep, reaching such depths that mere thought of light would be impossible there. The Dark Sea. As Sonny watched it in solemn silence, a subtle ripple spread across the surface of the imprisoned ocean of darkness. It was as though it was straining to spill over the edges of the pool and break free. However, the invisible powers that held it down were too mighty to overcome, even for this vast, boundless, inconceivable creature. The seal he had activated still held, showing no sign of growing weaker. Shifting his gaze, Sonny peered into the depths of the Dark Sea and let out a stifled chuckle. It did not change. All he could see was boundless, appalling darkness. However, somewhere deep, deep below, he seemed to have sensed the presence of 7 abyssal nodes, where the corruption was even denser. His suspicion had been right. The dark sea of the forgotten shore was indeed a living being, a great titan. Before, the mere thought of a great titan would have caused him to fall to his knees in terror. But after witnessing one dying miserably in the white mist, Sonny remained unmoved. He even felt a strange, daring compulsion to dive into the black waters. Why not? He had bathed in them before. Back then, the dark sea paid him no attention. Would it be different now that he was a saint, possessing a transcendent soul that would be much more nourishing for a being such as this? What would he find in the depths of the ancient sea of corruption? What mysteries were hidden in the unfathomable black waters? Should I find out? The temptation was strong. He reached toward the dark pool, tantalized by its lightless expanse. But then he stopped. Sonny remained motionless for a while, struggling against the sense of dark wonder. Then he slowly, laboriously pulled his hand back. What the hell am I doing? He wanted to dive into the dark sea. Back then, he was merely a sleeper, a powerless, pathetic, dormant beast. But now, he was a transcendent terror, and carried a cohort of fearsome shadows in his soul. Although his mind was telling him to be cautious, his heart recklessly believed that he could survive the depths of the great titan. Maybe he would even be able to destroy it. Why not? What would he lose if he actually died in that vast darkness? There was nothing to lose. Only there was now. If he had reached the ruin of the Crimson Spire before promising to be Rain's teacher, Sonny might have risked it. But now, things were different. She might not have remembered him, but he remembered her. He also remembered himself. Shaking his head, Sonny took a step back. I am such an idiot. It didn't even matter if he could survive in the embrace of the dark sea. What mattered more was that the great titan had been sealed by his own hand, and none of the nightmare creatures that dwelled in the black water were able to escape that seal. So if Sonny did dive into the black pool, he wouldn't be able to escape it either. Wouldn't it be funny to be imprisoned by the seal he himself had put in place? Smiling darkly, Sonny looked at the still water and sighed. If I ever become powerful enough to break the seal, maybe then we'll meet again. The black pool rippled, as if acknowledging his promise. Suddenly unnerved, Sonny took another step back and silently dissolved into the shadows. In the past, it had taken the Dreamer army many days of an arduous march to reach the Crimson Spire from the Dark City. Now, however, Sonny could traverse that distance in less than a minute. He was not in a hurry to leave, though. Leaving the towering mountain of rubble behind, he crossed the broken bridge and returned to the ashen wasteland. He remained motionless for a while, then sighed and leaned down to brush the dust off the old bones. In the end, it took him almost a week to find the remains of every sleeper that had perished in the battle for the Crimson Spire. There were 400 of them after all, and he had to be careful not to damage the brittle bones. So, it took some time. He placed them together on the ground, and then used the jagged slabs of black stone from the ruins of the gargantuan tower to construct a stone barrow above the mass grave. It was a little fitting to lay these young men and women to rest under the broken remains of the Crimson Spire, which they had laid down their lives to conquer. Sonny also collected the remains of every nightmare creature that had fallen in the battle, and piled them onto each other to the side of the barrow. The mountain of hideous bones towered above the stone grave, dwarfing it entirely in size, a poignant testament to how fearsome the dreamers of the Dark City had been, and how valiantly they had fought. He stood in front of the barrow for some time, and then sighed. We were tough bastards, weren't we? You guys rest easy now. The others are doing well. Most of them still follow Nephi's, but they are masters now. The remaining handmaidens will ascend before too long, as well Sation is taking care of them. Oh, Effie and Kai are already saints. There are a few independents like myself out there too. We all escaped. Sonny didn't know why he was saying that. His words rang hollow. He wasn't a big fan of speaking to the dead to begin with. What was the point? Shaking his head, he approached the barrow and carved a few runes into the surface of the black stone. The runes read, "Here lie those who extinguish the sun, dreamers of the dark city. Sleep well. Your nightmare is over." Stepping back from the slab of black stone with a heavy heart, Sunny remained silent for a while, then sighed and turned away. Walking across the sea of ash and dust, he summoned Nightmare and jumped into the saddle. His voice sounded rough when he urged the stallion forward and said, "Let's get out of here." A young man with alabaster skin and raven-black hair rode through the darkness on a tenebrous steed, his fearsome armor crafted from polished onyx. In front of him, a great wall of dark stone rose into the lightless sky, obscuring the world. Sunny had reached the dark city. He hunched in the saddle, looking up at the towering wall. The city, which had been populated by dreadful abominations, was now peaceful and silent. He could not sense any movement on its ancient streets. After lingering for a while, Sunny stepped through the shadows and appeared on top of the wall. Gazing down, he saw a familiar landscape. In the distance, the twisted and misshapen ruins of the bright castle were covered in soot. The sleepers had set flame to the ancient fortress before leaving, destroying that which had withstood the cruelty of time. He could recognize many other landmarks as well. The toppled lighthouse, the half-collapsed library where he had once learned the truth of the forgotten shore, the plaza where Saint and her siblings had once fallen, the ruined cathedral. Even all these years later, Sunny remembered every ruined street of the dark city where he had hunted, the places where he had ambushed abominations, the places where he had been ambushed by them. There were countless pieces of rubble here that had been wetted by his blood, and even more that he had painted with the blood of his enemies. A fallen nightmare creature had seemed like the end of the world back then. Smiling wryly, Sunny took a step into nothingness and jumped down from the great wall of the dark city. The wind whistled in his ears for a few seconds, and then he landed on the stone rubble. The silence enveloping the ruins was momentarily broken by the thunderous boom of his landing. The terror of the Crimson Spire had annihilated most of the living beings on the forgotten shore to fuel her transformation into a corrupted titan. Everywhere the rays of the ruthless sun had reached, nothing but death remained. But there were many dark places in the ancient city. The interiors of the ruined buildings, the catacombs, the lairs dug in the rubble, the sun could not reach there. More than that, the abominations populating the dark city were much stronger than those in the Crimson Labyrinth, so a few of them had to have survived the annihilation. Sunny was calling them over, wishing to eradicate them all in one fell swoop. However, even after he had made so much noise, nothing moved in the ruins. His shadow sense was enveloping the whole city, but Sunny could not feel any motion at all. Puzzled, he brushed the dust off the onyx mantle and ventured into the maze of ruined streets. Sunny spent the whole day exploring the dark city. He wandered the ruins and reminisced about the past wistfully. Here, he had rescued Kai from the well. Here, he had learned from Effie how to kill a blood fiend. Here was the ditch where he had hidden himself after the Black Knight gutted him. How nostalgic. By the end of the day, Sunny knew why there were no nightmare creatures left in the dark city. There were a lot of hideous remains on the ruined streets. Most of them showed no sign of having received a wound, since their souls had been annihilated by the Crimson Terror. But some bones had nicks and deep cracks on them. Others were scorched by flame. Nephis. She must have come here after escaping the Crimson Spire and hunted the remaining abominations down, one after another, to build another core and harvest their meat for the long journey ahead. A faint smile twisted his lips. She's so thorough. With the mystery solved, he wandered the ruins some more and eventually made his way to the remains of the bright castle. The ancient stronghold had collapsed. the white marble melted by the terrible heat of the white flames. He did not know why he wanted to see the scorched ruin. So many things had happened here, between the castle's walls. But now it was all erased by the fire. Just like him. Chuckling, Sonny shook his head and wandered the remains of the outer settlement for a bit. He kicked stones and remembered the past, then stopped by the lodge where Nephi's and Cassie had once lived. Now it was empty and quiet. After visiting his old room, he left the outer settlement and descended back into the city. Finally, Sonny reached the ruined cathedral. He entered the majestic great hall, climbed over the toppled column that Saint had once dropped on the Black Night, and gazed at the statue of the nameless goddess. He studied her face for a while, then stepped through the shadows and appeared on the hidden balcony behind it. Soon, he entered a familiar chamber. The living quarters of the young priestess were neat and tidy, just as he had left them. The room was beautiful and spacious. The stone walls were engraved with intricate patterns, creating an atmosphere of sanctity and elegance. The furniture was made out of pale, polished wood, with several mismatched pieces that Sonny had scavenged from the dark city once. He was surrounded by a soothing darkness. The chamber had no windows, but there were light wells cunningly hidden here and there. The ingenious system of mirrors that was supposed to bathe the room in sunlight was long destroyed, though. And so was the sun itself. Sonny closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. Then he recalled the onyx mantle, walked over to the spacious bed, sprawled on it, and fell asleep with a satisfied smile. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.